Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome all my colleagues, students, and the family of AIIMS to this important short workshop. And a special welcome to Professor Norcini, Professor Kalpana, and for being here. And thank you for making it, despite very challenging times globally, and it's not the easiest time to fly across the world, but thank you for being here. I think Professor Norcini needs no introduction. He's the founder president of FAIMER and continues to work there as Emeritus president. And just to briefly introduce you to AIIMS, AIIMS is the premier medical institute in India. We have been consistently ranked #1 in all the table leagues, and which we like to top a bit. But yeah, and recently the hospital was also ranked #6 by the 2026 Brand Finance Global Top 250 Hospital rankings. We have three essential mandates, which is clinical care, research, and very importantly, medical education. And we have 56 teaching departments and centers. And we have had many firsts in the field of medical education, including introduction of integrated seminars in undergraduate curriculum, objectivized assessment strategies, 3-year postgraduate program, which was first introduced at AIIMS New Delhi and then adopted by the Medical Council and what is now the National Medical Council, and initiation of super specialty courses or subspecialty courses in medicine and surgery, and more recently, including simulation-based medical education within the undergraduate curriculum. So it's again a very warm welcome to you, and it's a pleasure to host you for this session. I would now request my colleagues Ravneet and Simran to share the session and introduce her from.
Thank you, sir. So it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Norcini, a globally recognized leader in health profession education. As the founding president and CEO of FAIMER, he has significantly influenced how clinical competence is evaluated worldwide. He is currently serving as the president emeritus of FAIMER and a research professor at SUNY Upstate Medical University, New York. He has contributed extensively to the advancing workplace assessment and setting international standards in medical education. Professor Norcini has played a transformative role in redefining physician assessment by emphasizing on real-world performance and developing globally accepted frameworks as those from Ottawa Consensus. With over 200 publications, global teaching experience across 45 plus countries, and prestigious honors including Karolinska Prize, his work continues to shape modern medical education and assessment practices. With that, I warmly welcome you, sir. It's a privilege to have you at AIIMS New Delhi.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I don't think I'm any of those things, but I do appreciate it anyway. I'm really honored and delighted to be here. In particular, as I've known, as everybody in the world knows, AIIMS is one of the premier places in the world. And so I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Increase, it's no longer, I think, a very effective way to go forward. So what I'm going to do today are talk about 4 things. First, I'll talk about the roles assessment plays in medical education. Second, I'll talk about what systems of assessment are and why they're needed. Third, I'll talk about the elements of a well-functioning system. And finally, I'll develop for you a sort of crude roadmap for developing a system. So that's the plan. So what roles does assessment play in the educational enterprise? Well, one that we're all familiar with, that we all grew up with, and that for many of us was only what assessment was about, was making decisions. So assessment is the basis for certifying knowledge, skills, and attitudes, demonstrates accountability on the part of the institution, and this is the historic purpose of assessment. And it's a reasonable thing to do, it's a good thing to do, and we can't lose that purpose. That purpose is important and will remain important. One of the keys in terms of summative assessment is that it actually has a signaling effect. It tells students what it is you value, and it drives them to learn in a way that responds to the assessments you give them. So it's absolutely critical, summative assessment, in driving students to learn what they need to learn. On the other hand, if you don't assess someone in a topic, it can be destructive. And I think one of the best examples of this is professionalism. There are many institutions that don't assess professionalism, and as a consequence of that, students don't necessarily value it. So in addition to thinking from an assessment perspective about what decisions you need to make, you also need to think about summative assessment from the perspective of what impact it has on students, what they do to prepare, and what happens when you don't assess something, which is that you declare it basically unimportant. The third kind of area, that kind of function of assessment, role of assessment, is in terms of learning. We really, 30 years ago, we were not really very focused on assessment as a device to support and enhance learning. Over the past, say, 15, 20 years, it really has climbed a mountain in terms of indicating its importance and its utility in the educational process. So the first thing assessment does is it provides feedback, and feedback is one of the biggest drivers of learning. There's a wonderful meta-analysis of meta-analyses by this guy named Hattie in Australia. And he basically summarized for elementary and secondary education, thousands of students, tens of thousands of schools and teachers. This was a huge meta-analysis of meta-analyses. And what he found was that one of the biggest drivers of achievement was feedback. There's something in education called an effect size. Effect size is a standard deviation. It's this big, rarely achieved in education. But what he found is for feedback alone, the effect, feedback alone pushes assessment about 9/10 of a standard deviation. So the effect size is huge among the things that we know in education. So if you're not providing feedback, you're missing one of the biggest chances for driving and creating learning. So one of the key features of assessment is that you need to give it in order to give feedback. You may not think of it formally, but feedback assessment is the precursor to feedback. You can't give feedback without doing assessment. Maybe informal, may not be good assessment, but if you're giving feedback, you're doing assessment. The other thing that we focused on in the past, more in the past 5 or 10 years, is the fact that assessment actually creates learning. It's a wonderful series of studies by these folks at the University of Indiana. What they did, starting out with the secondary school students, was they created a reading passage. They gave it to the students, asked them to read it, and randomly divided it in half. Half the group read the passage 3 more times. The other half of the group took a test 3 times. At the end of a couple of weeks, they tested the students again. And the students that were tested 3 times did better than the students who just read the passage 3 times. Test was different than the test they were given, and the test the students were given as the experimental part of this, they got no feedback on, so they didn't know what was right and what was wrong. So basically, the idea is that feedback encourages you to learn. It's not good enough just to take things in. You have to practice taking them out again. And when you take them out again, you look at your performance, you self-reflect, and you make changes, and then you restore it. So assessment really does both of these things in terms of education. It provides feedback, which is really important, and it creates an active retrieval process and enhances that. So that's why, for example, frequent no stakes quizzes have an effect, because students take advantage of these learning effects. So those are the 3 roles. So what are systems of assessment? Well, obviously, if you're in any educational institution and you want to fulfill those 3 roles, you need to have multiple assessments. Obviously, you're giving them all the time. So every school does this, and therefore every school has a system of assessment. But we rarely think of it, nor do we manage it, as a system. We think of it as mostly as a collection of pieces, as the sort of sum of the parts. And as a consequence of that, we don't do much central planning. Most of the assessment is at the level of the course of rotation. And most of the assessment we do is summative. But that's changing, and it has to change. And it's changing, I think, for two big reasons. The first is that there's a shift to competencies, as we all know. Outcomes-based education is now firmly entrenched. It's the focus. And so making sure that students and trainees have the competencies they need by the end of training is the central piece of that. And because those competencies exist across the continuum, we really need to begin to think about assessment in a different way. We can't be thinking about it as something that happens in a course or on a rotation. We have to take account of the entire educational process and make sure that the shift in assessment occurs along those lines. And the other thing I just mentioned is that there's a growing appreciation for the power of formative assessment. And as a consequence, we need to begin to think about how we're driving formative assessment, how we're driving it across the curriculum. So given that many institutions want to move in these directions, we all face a set of constraints. There are constraints in terms of class size. We know that class size has expanded here. It certainly has expanded in my country. And the number of medical schools, I understand, has expanded significantly as well. Faculty time is at a premium, as you all know. And thank you for taking time from busy work. Regulatory requirements and the literacy about assessment is uneven. It's not equally distributed across the faculty. As a consequence of this, thinking about assessment from a systems perspective will help manage that process. So I have a good friend, FAIMER fellow from Brazil, who illustrated this much better than the probably 10,000 words I just delivered. Basically, if you look at this, figure 1.1 is no assessment, black field. Single assessment tool is figure 1.2. 1.3 is several assessment tools. And this is the current state of affairs. They're not focused on any central point. They're just points of light in the field. And when we think about systems of assessment, really what we're aiming for is figure 1.4, where we've coordinated all of our assessments. Hopefully, because we've done that, we're being more efficient, but hopefully as well, we're covering more of the field discipline. So what are the core concepts of a system? Well, they're pretty straightforward, and you're all familiar with them since you're all familiar with systems everywhere else. So there are relationships among the pieces of the system. There are boundaries and interactions with other systems. The system is dynamic, it changes over time. And different stakeholders bring different perspectives to the system. The advantages of taking a systems approach is that, as I said, it allows you to create a series of efficiencies because you're going to coordinate the assessments across the entire curriculum. It allows you to do different kinds of analyses, different kinds of summaries, provides you a broader view of what you value. Feedback systems will help identify problems, and solutions to problems are expanded because they don't exist in any one course or any one assessment, but across the entire system. So what are the elements of a well-functioning system? Somebody mentioned the Ottawa Conference a little bit ago. The Ottawa Conference occurs every couple of years. Has been around for probably 35 or 40 years, probably been a while. It's even older than I am. No, it isn't. And one of the unique things about the conference is that they have decided to generate consensus reports. So the group takes on a topic of importance and it puts together folks from around the world and they reach consensus. And the first of these came in 2010, I believe. And at that time, I was associated with the Framework for Good Assessment. And what we did is we focused on single assessments. So we developed a series of characteristics that we thought were important from the perspective of single assessments. What are the things you cared about, like validity and reproducibility, equivalence, and so on. And we were comfortable with that in 2010. But even in 2010, we recognized that it wasn't good enough just to stop here. We needed to begin to think not about single assessments, but about multiple assessments. And so in 2018, they got the band back together again, and we endorsed the 2010 framework, and we added a framework for systems of assessment. And these are sort of common sense kinds of characteristics we came up with. We came up with 8 of them. 3 of them relate to design quality. So is the system coherent? Is it comprehensive, and is it feasible? Educational impact. So we focused on continuous, purpose-driven, and catalytic. Does it create learning when it's intended to? And trust and fairness, acceptable and free from bias. So a good system is a system that works in the way it should, that teaches students, and that's trusted and transparent for all. The last thing I'll mention is a roadmap for creating a system. And I think it needs to address 4 sort of questions, and it needs to address them iteratively. Where'd that word go for? Iteratively. That's not how you say it, but you know what I mean. Over and over again. So first, who oversees the decision is it coordinated? Second, what currently exists. So some kind of a map. Third, what influences the system. And fourth, who needs to be on board. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So as you all know, assessment is most often siloed. It exists in courses, it exists in rotations, and it's not at all often considered when a curriculum is redone. I have been involved through my career in many, many curricular revisions, and it has not at all been unusual for the curriculum to be done, and then for them to say, oh, there's assessment, well, you just take care of that. You just fit it into whatever the new design is. So it ends up being a situation where assessment is never really integrated fully into the process. So in a sense, if assessment is everybody's job, it's nobody's responsibility. So it's absolutely critical to coordinate what's happening in terms of assessment and across the curriculum. The poster child for this, in a way, is a clinical competence committee that some postgraduate programs use. Basically, the program director creates a committee, and the purpose of the committee is to oversee all assessment throughout the training program. The committee ends up reporting to the program director. So they oversee all the assessments, and they're responsible for promotion, for graduation, for dismissal, remediation when it's needed, and as well as quality improvement. So these are really important functions, and these functions need to be coordinated across the entire curriculum. The structure of this curriculum, the example I gave is a clinical competence committee. There are many other structures that you can use to accomplish these same ends. Whatever you use, whatever works is fine, as long as it features an integrated review, defensible decisions, and a continuous improvement process. Second thing that is useful to do, I think, is to create a systems map. Because it's siloed, there's really no overarching understanding of assessment in many institutions. If you map the pieces, it will identify what's going on, what the relationships are, who the stakeholders are, where you can intervene, what the problems are. So the first step here is really to create a map of what you're currently doing right now. And that map will define the purpose going forward. It'll allow you to identify and list the elements in the assessment system. It lets you map the connections among them, identify feedback, and visualize and refine the map. So if I were starting tomorrow to think about a system of assessment, this is the very first thing I would do. very first thing I would do is see what's currently exists. It's hard to move forward unless you know where you are. Third thing is that all systems have boundaries, and as a consequence of that, the assessment system that you develop has to interdigitate with those boundaries well. So there are always a series of input and output that you need to be aware of. And as part of the mapping process, you really need to understand where these boundaries are and what you need to do in response to those boundaries. So there's something called a boundary map. It fits nicely with the system map we just talked about. And it basically specifies the inputs to the system, outputs from the system, external influences like accreditation, and interactions. What resources do we have? What information do we have? Are they durable? And finally, and it's unfortunately often ignored, an assessment is often imposed. Some folks at the top tell everybody else basically what to do. And one of the things that I think going forward that's important is to make sure that all the stakeholders contribute or have the opportunity to contribute to the assessment system. If you do a stakeholder analysis, it will allow you to do targeted communication. It promotes understanding of the assessment system. It allows you to anticipate problems, and it offers insights from others into what it is you're doing in terms of assessment. So a stakeholder analysis includes four kind of pieces: identification of the stakeholders, categorizing them, prioritizing them, and then engaging with each of them around a plan. So we all know who the stakeholders are, although we don't often include them in our conversations about assessment. Employers, students, faculty, community, leadership, there are a whole raft of stakeholders that we don't necessarily incorporate into our planning for assessment. One of the keys is to take that group and to prioritize them. Prioritize them in terms of their power to make your life better or worse, and as well, how interested they are in the assessment system. So one idea would be to create a four category table. So you might look at folks with high interest and high power, the dean perhaps, and make sure you're collaborating with him or her. For high power stakeholders who aren't really that interested, you want to keep them informed, you don't want them surprised. In terms of lower power, keeping them satisfied, high interest, low power, keeping them satisfied. Students are the key, I think, in this particular category. So getting students involved in this, I think, is absolutely critical. And finally, for low, monitoring what they think about the system. So for each of those, you can create a targeted engagement plan for each group. Make sure that the plan is ongoing, and in that, at the end of the day, this will help you improve your communication with the world about the assessment system, as well as getting information about the quality of the system that you can incorporate into a continuous improvement cycle. So to summarize, assessment drives culture, learning, and decisions. It's an absolutely central part of the educational system. I think a systems approach to that helps institutions to use the data that you already have and you will collect more wisely. It supports learning without creating fear necessarily, and it makes decisions that are transparent and defensible. So a good assessment system works for the students, and given its purposes, it teaches and it's trusted by those involved with them. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Norcini, for such a wonderful talk. And we have got very useful insights into the systems of assessment. And you very aptly mentioned that assessment forms the basis of very important decisions. They say when the teachers decide what to teach, they look at the curriculum, and when the students decide what to study, they look at previous year's questions. So that is why it is important, and you adequately, I think appropriately highlighted it, that we need to include the competencies across the curriculum. So whatever gets assessed, students are obviously more inclined to study that and read that. And also to mention the power of formative assessment and the importance of the feedback. And I think all of us are now, looking forward to prepare and incorporate the systems approach to the assessment. And thank you very much. And now I would invite questions from the audience, and we open this discussion. So you can have a seat.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
So when you say that there should be a structure for clinical assessment, do you mean that at institution level there has to be a separate structure, or in the departments itself we do the clinical assessment of our own subjects?
So, okay. Yes, I think it needs to be institutional. You obviously are the content experts. And as a consequence of that, you need to be in charge of the content of those assessments. But the form of those assessments, I think, needs to be at an institutional level. There needs to be some general group that coordinates the activities, because students are going through different departments over time, and someone needs to have an overview of all of that. So focusing just within a single department, I think, leads to some of the concerns that folks have had traditionally about assessment. It also splits the discipline and makes it harder to make judgments about competencies by the end of training, unless you think about all those as just being added. You can argue with me about that. I can tell that I probably haven't pleased you with that response.
But this is very difficult. Like it is, again, meaning a lots of resources are needed.
I don't think additional resources are needed, because you're already doing all the assessment, right? So if there was a committee, for example, across.
So members from the disciplines go to that committee, they become members of that committee, and they examine all the students.
Yes.
So the second one is that you told about involving all stakeholders.
Yes.
We tried it in community.
Mm-hmm.
Our students are going to community and they're spending 10 months weekly, like once a week they go. So when we gave this thing to the community, what happened is that the students, from our point of view, the students who were not learning or who were not good at studies, not fulfilling the objectives which we had for the posting, were the ones who were who got high scores by the community. So how do we deal with that when multiple stakeholders are involved?
So I would imagine that there are some things that where doing well in the community, there's some competencies that a student possesses that are important in interacting with the community in terms of that posting, as well as being a doctor when they're done. So I think focusing the assessment of the community on the competencies that the community can best assess is absolutely critical. So I think that the idea is to focus. The idea is to focus on assessors, stakeholders, on what stakeholders know best, and there will be competencies to which that input would be really relevant.
So with that, I also have a question. So you mentioned something about the assessment of professionalism,
Mhm.
which is usually not done. So in continuation with ma'am's question, do you think incorporating the assessment of professionalism might help to balance the community marks and the assessor marks?
Absolutely. I think the assessment of professionalism is absolutely essential going forward. I think, at least in my country, the profession has been criticized often for insensitivity to patients, for problems of misbehavior, especially as physicians go into practice. And as a consequence of that, I think the school and the profession have an obligation to be assessing those kinds of competencies and making sure that students are judged and they have the tools they need to do well when they end up in practice.
Very rightly said.
Professor. And so I was particularly impressed by one particular slide on the committee that would have all stakeholders, which includes community representatives. As a matter of fact, in medical education, one of the biggest effect of the education would be on the community. So how do you incorporate and what kind of members from the community would you incorporate in such a central monitoring committee, which would decide on the method of assessment or the system of assessment?
So there's first two responses. One is that's going to be context dependent. It depends on the community that you want to engage and exactly how you want to use them in that committee. The second piece is that many committees I know have, in the US, we call them public members. So they're members who are not part of the profession, but that are knowledgeable in terms of the issues involved and serve as representatives. It can be very useful in that kind of setting. So I think finding, I don't know what you would call it here, but finding some analog to the public member or members might be a very reasonable thing to do. I know the boards in the United States, the certifying boards, have one or two members on the board at least who are public members.
So, problem with that, as I see it, is that very often we also have in our academic committee members of the parliament who are supposed to be representatives of the people. But very often people who become members of the parliament are far removed from the reality of the person who would be pulling a rickshaw.
Yes.
And therefore the person who is going to be affected is eventually going to be the patient in the community. So how do we get their representation in the method of assessment? So, for example, a person who's a member of parliament may be particularly requiring geriatric or even cardiac care. So they would be concerned about the curriculum as it affects metabolic diseases, cardiac diseases, and so on and so forth. And therefore, they would want an assessment that is focused on these areas. But the top man would be more concerned about deliveries of babies safely, about common colds, chest pains that affect the community, and so on. And that voice is often not represented. So when we blueprint an assessment, how do we actually get all the departmental blueprints and then get into something that is going to be a system-based approach that prioritizes that this is what is required in the community based on the proportion of what is required? That would, I think, be a systems approach.
Yes, it would. And as someone who's of a certain age, I understand the interest in geriatrics. But that aside, the point you make is an important one, and that is that who you choose to be the representative is absolutely critical. At least in the US, the last person I would want sitting around the table would be someone in government. They have a whole set of priorities that are understandable and useful, but probably not in this context. So when I was with the board and we were looking for public members, we went looking for folks who could represent the views you talked about. So representatives of the community or academics who had studied them or folks who had considerable experience in that environment. So that's the point of a public member, and choosing that person or those persons carefully is really important. The other thing is that what they're going to be bringing you, I believe, is a set of values that are important. I would not necessarily use them to help you with the blueprint. I would use them to bring you their values, and then you as the experts need to translate those values into something that makes sense down the line. So I think you need to be just a little careful about what you ask folks to do.
Just
building on the previous question of assessment of professionalism,
Mhm.
could you just elaborate on that? It could mean different things for the different streams of medical branch. It could mean different for different clinical fields. It could mean different things for preclinical and branches. So, I mean, how do you think about that professional? Could you elaborate on what you mean by assessment professionalism for different branches?
Yeah, so I'm reluctant to give you a definition because all of these definitions are context specific. Okay, so there's not one sort of fabulous definition of professionalism. In fact, for a talk a few weeks ago, I Googled medical professionalism and definitions, and I got like 10 or 20 million hits. I mean, everybody and their pet snake has a definition of professionalism. So it's really important that you focus on your setting and generate that for yourself. So I don't want to be pushing that. But there are sort of processes and commonalities across those definitions that folks have focused on. So there are pieces of that relate to communication skills, pieces of that relate to values. So there's a whole sort of getting along, interprofessional practice piece of that. How do you get along with the folks you're with? So I don't want to push a particular definition, and if I start doing that, I'm gonna go down a path that I'm not comfortable with because I don't know your context. But the idea is to develop a definition. There are many methods of assessing it, none of them perfect, but they're a routine part, starting early in training in many schools, with how the students get along with each other, how they treat everyone else, and migrating later to getting input from other healthcare providers, from patients, and so on. So I think there are a variety of ways to begin to address that. But the first step is to sort of define what it is you mean by it, but then helping students understand what that means, making it clear that that's something you value, and then including it as part of the assessment process along the way is important. And especially early on, you may want to think of that as wholly formative. It's not something you want to make a summative assessment on, maybe for many years, but at least starting with that and drawing attention to it, I think is important.
Thank you, Dr. Norcini, for a very insightful talk. So going back to Dr. Kiran Goswami's question, I wanted your thought on this. That when we talk about assessing the needs of the community, when we at the time of assessment, rather than that, at the time of revising the curriculum into a competency-based one, based on the changes that happen in the society and the requirements by the community. So, and then based on those learning objectives that are defined and whatever teaching, learning, novel methodologies that you use, those can be assessed on what you expect would be the learning outcome expected of that batch of undergraduates or postgraduates. So also, one more second question to that is that when we start integrating, then this kind of an assessment becomes more complex. So when we do a horizontal or a vertical integration, if we just sum up the questions from the respective specialities, it is just like bunching them together without any connection.
Yes.
And as you said, there should be a base question to which all of them provide the answer.
Yes. So you asked two questions, and at my age, I forgot the first. So let's just focus on the second for half a minute. So you're absolutely right. That the traditional way of putting together an exam is everybody send me in 5 questions, and then we'll slop them all together and we'll put them on the examination. It's an awful process. It's completely awful. So there are a couple of things that need to happen. First of all, you need to have a blueprint that drives the examination. You don't just take 5 questions from someone. There has to be a blueprint before you put together an examination. Absolutely critical. The blueprint doesn't need to be limited by your course. In fact, ideally, the blueprint would cut across the curriculum in some fashion so that there was an integration over time in terms of what someone learned. And you don't have to think of every test you give in every course as standing on its own. So instead of putting together a test with 100 questions at one point in time, I could easily see 30 questions, 30 questions, and 30 questions over time, and then making a decision at the end of that. And that doesn't need to be focused on a single course. So we have this idea, not you, but the world has this idea that assessment of a course is the fundamental building block, and it doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, if we free ourselves from that constraint, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities, both in terms of efficiency, but in terms of quality as well. First question.
Earlier point was assessment. That the assessment is going to address the need of the community.
Mhm.
So does the need of the community come at the stage of assessment or at the time of framing the curriculum and the learning objectives?
Yes, clearly it has to be. In an ideal world, this system would be part of a curricular reform. So if a curriculum already exists, the things I talk about are a way to back end that. But if this ought to be part of a curriculum.
So I have a question,
Yeah.
Dr. Norcini. It's very, very contextual.
Yeah, good.
So I'm from the Department of Anesthesia, and we have a very kind of, I would say, very weak formative assessment system.
Mhm.
So today, if I think I have to have a very robust formative assessment, and which happens every 6 months in our department, and I start using your framework and design the assessment system, how long would it take for me to formally launch such a system?
That is contextually, that is pretty contextual. I guess it would.
It's a postgraduate course.
Yeah, so I actually think this could occur relatively quickly in a postgraduate setting. I think what kind of assessments do you use?
So we have case-based discussions
Okay, good.
and OSCEs
Okay,
and theoretical
Exam.
SAQs and long essay type questions.
okay. So you have sort of some building blocks there.
Yes, some building blocks are there, but we've never used any kind of analysis before instituting.
So if you think about what you're currently doing, the first thing is to take a step back. You need to be clear about what competencies you want someone to have by the end of that period of training. So that's the place to start. And then you take the step back from that, I think, is that you develop an assessment system, the summative part of that ensures the competencies you've already decided on. Okay? And given what you just described, I'm not sure all the pieces are there for you quite yet, but maybe they are. I don't know. So once you have the competencies, then you do the summative piece, then you back into the formative piece. And you think about the summative examination as the goal, so that you buy in trainee interest, because you're basically assessing them the same way. It's just that they're not being graded. So they're basically being prepared for the examination. So this way, the whole system is aligned. You start with competencies, you work back to the summative assessments that address those competencies, and then you work back to the formative assessment. It helps with the summative assessment, which is already aligned with the competency. So the whole system is aligned, going in the same direction.
So, but wouldn't in a clinical department,
Yeah.
My thoughts are that the formative assessment need not always be aligned to the summative assessment, because there's a lot to assess.
If you have the resource to do that, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can make a good argument for making sure that there are areas that you want to teach about, but they probably aren't critical, maybe rare occurrences or occurrences where the stakes are high but don't happen very much. Doing those in a formative setting would be absolutely wonderful. So if you have the resource to do that, yes, absolutely.
But the timeline.
The timeline? Now you've well gone beyond my ability to predict. But I bet you could do that in a relatively short period of time. The key is, if you already have the competencies that exist and you're all familiar with them, then the first step is to align the summative assessment with those. And I bet you could do that within 6 months or a year. But so I think that piece is probably the most important piece. and then the formative piece, which is can come a little bit later.
So I have a point here, like most of us are using our formative assessments like summative. We do take some test at the end of 6 months and then we just give the results out to them. Right? The purpose of a formative assessment is to give the feedback and use it for further learning. So I think all of us have to always keep this in mind to use formative assessments as formative assessments and not as summative assessments.
And let me take that just a step further, if I could.
You sure?
I think it's a really bad idea to tell students that you're giving them a formative assessment and then use the information to make a decision. Okay, because the students know that that's not formative. That's a summative assessment. So a wonderful description of an assessment system at a U.S. medical school that shall remain unnamed. It's on their website, and it talks about the fact that there's this OSCE that we're given, and it's good. It's intended entirely for feedback, and they're like 10 sentences describing how this is going to be great for you, and then the last sentence says, if you don't do so well, you're probably going to have to take it again, and then if you have to take it again, then you have to go to remediation, and then you're going to fail the first year of training. Well, that's everybody in the world knows that's not formative. That's summative, and it's important because for a couple of reasons. I think the most important one is that students react very differently to summative assessment than they respond to formative assessment. When you do summative assessment with students, they rightfully say the game is on. And now they want to play with you around what grades you're giving them and why are you giving me this? And they forget the feedback. There's some very pretty studies around it. So it really is important to try and separate the two.
So are there any further questions?
There are lots of questions, but one question is there. So when we are playing with assessment and adding lots of other domains to it, what bothers me is that students are targeted to learn the things which they want to learn for assessment purpose. So they are putting less of effort towards the clinical things than the things which are easy to score. Like when ethics and professionalism things are there, they are learned behavior, and people can. It is not. It does not. It is not a valid measure of whether the attitude and practice is changing. That is also there. So then we are making it softer, and what happens is the good students, they lose interest in the subject, because I have seen many students who are very bright and they are very intelligent, but when they see that the teacher is assessing the other things like the teamwork, what is this member's name, who will be this, so things like that, then they say, what is the fun in studying if these are the things which are being assessed?
So again, you need to assess everything. It's not like you can assess some competencies and not others. Okay, so you really need to focus on what you value. And it sounds to me like the system you described is not aligned properly, because the outcomes you're looking for are not aligned with the assessments you're giving, and students will naturally turn it into a game. And if the game is that all I need to do is study at the library, then that's what I do. There have been studies years ago asking students what they do, how do they prepare for a written exam, and they say, well, we go to the library, we read the book. And other students, what do you do when you're given an OSCE or when you're assessed in the clinical setting? They say, we go to the bedside. We try to learn what it is we need to learn. So the first thing that has to happen in assessment, regardless of all the other stuff we just talked about, the first thing is that the assessment needs to be aligned with the curriculum and your expectations of them and what they need.
So thank you, Professor Norcini. Thank you for the insightful talk and important pointers for all of us to introspect. And with that, we conclude this session. I would like to invite the organizers.
Thank you, Professor Simran and Professor Ravi, for co-chairing the session.
Now we'll move forward to the panel discussion on the topic creating a center of excellence in health professions education. I invite distinguished faculty members as the panelists for the discussion. May I invite Professor Kalpana, uh, Professor Ambuj Roy, Professor Rashmi, Dr. Tandon to the panel, and I would like to invite Professor Anu to moderate the panel discussion.
So, a very good afternoon. It's actually my honor and privilege to be the moderator for an esteemed group of panelists, and I think need no introduction, but just to set the ball rolling. So, we welcome all of you and Professor Nikhil Tandon, our own Dean Academics and widely respected for his academic leadership. Professor Kalpana Ma'am, Professor and Head Department of Biochemistry and Chief Continued Medical Education and Technology, Professor John Norcini, President Emeritus, FAIMER, for those who joined late, and a globally acclaimed leader. And we just listened to him and on his pioneering work in assessment. Professor Ambuj Roy, Professor of Cardiology and in charge of the SET facility and the SET program. And Ma'am, Professor Rashmi Ramachandran, Professor, Department of Anesthesiology, and a key faculty member, a true leader who brings exceptional dedication. So welcome everyone. And without taking much time, so the first question is to Sir and Professor Nikhil Tandon. Sir, from an institutional lens, if we start looking at, because here we'll be discussing about the Center of Excellence, so what actually transforms a good academic unit into a true center for excellence for health professional education, sir? So, what could be the non-negotiables?
I think just historically, for some of the younger audience, I think we've got to put in perspective as to what's been going on in the institution, and that's been going on for a while. Several people perhaps not part of the institution when it really happened. I'm sure this has been alluded to earlier, but the creation for the Center for Medical Education and Technology, which is now currently headed by Dr. Kalpana, was actually something which happened around the time when I was perhaps an undergraduate. Right? So that takes us a few decades ago. And a lot of that was with at least 2 or 3 waves of faculty initially going to the University of Dundee to actually get, and that was those were the pre-internet era. There's nothing called virtual learning. People actually physically traveled, stayed there, and did a lot of learning, and that basically then ended up creating a committed cadre of individuals who had an interest in not just routine teaching, but also thinking deep into the process of, and also creating positions for an educationist, creating positions for people who could assist with the media for teaching. And I think that was, I'm not sort of getting into the business of saying who started first or who didn't start first, but I think this is one of the earlier wave of efforts in India, which is very important to understand. That has really got consolidated over a period of time, and we must give credit to the CMET for what they've done. And it's now so very much part of the DNA of the young faculty of this institute that it sort of tend to fly under the radar in many instances. There's a round-the-year roster of training programs which is conducted through CMET, which I think people have just it's so intrinsic to what happens in the institution on a day-to-day basis that people forget that it's happening. But it's very much there, and I think it's contributed significantly, including, if I'm not wrong, maybe there's there's something related to assessment going on today itself, as we have Professor Norcini out here. So I think it helps. So CMET at that point in time and continued since has allowed us to create a nidus of individuals who are interested specifically in this over and above their routine teaching responsibilities, which I think is important because things have evolved subsequently as to what is good, what's the mechanism of teaching, what's the mechanism of assessment. I mean, I remember again, the first time OSCE came in was when I was an undergraduate, was in surgery. right? And we shifted from a conventional end of the posting assessment to Norcini. So which again is an 80 whatever 485 something like so this being gradually incorporated into the function, and therefore we call it a center of excellence, you call it a center. Essentially you need a dedicated unit. You can give it whatever nomenclature you want as then you've got to take a decision as to whether the remit of that unit is going to be limited to the institution, right? And primarily dedicated to enhancing skills and competencies within the institutions with a minimum extra institutional outreach again, or we're in the business primarily of, expanding our reach across the region, across the country. That's a strategic decision. And I think that's something which institutions will need to take on their own as to how much time they have to do that, whether it's critical, whether it's not. I mean, the Medical Council of India in business of this has been much later, much later. Now, obviously, as a Medical Council of India, they merit or they're required to do it across medical colleges. And that's not a remit of this institution. We're often sort of the demonstration site for a lot of things, which then gets taken up by other institutions and then spread. And that's happened whether it was converting the first professional examination from 1.5 years to 1 year, converting the second prof to 1.5 years and 2 years. All of that actually, I think it's important to understand for the medical undergraduates, all of that. And I'm sort of underlining is all caps, bold, and underline, all started in this institution, was then subsequently taken up by the Medical Council and the others. So I think we've got to really understand we need something like this. We've got to decide strategically what is relevant for us, what is essential for us, and then what are the optional extras. And then decide how much we can sort of spread our wings or try and go outside. So, but short answer to your question is whether it's a center of excellence or a center or a unit or a department or whatever you may want to call it, you need an entity which is dedicated to this.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So what we hear from you is a dedicated team. Decide on the reach, whether it's out, how far you want to go ahead, and decide what is relevant and what is extra. So thank you so much for that. Continuing on to the same thing, I would request now Professor Kalpana. Now, we often have these strong policies. So the policies are in place, the curriculum is in place, but actually the problem comes when you have to execute them. So once we start the Center of Excellence, so I would like to ask you, what are the 3 operational steps that need to be in place, and then we set the ball rolling?
So if once it is in place, I think the first would be to prioritize the need based on doing an assessment community-based need, as Dr. Goswami pointed out. And secondly, the institutional strategy, whether the institute needs to prioritize that area. So once that area based on need of the health professionals and the community is set, once we prioritize it, the second step would be to establish a governance model. Reason being, for any center of excellence to sustain, you need constant funding, you need handholding, and there has to be a sort of a hierarchical model established so that the deliverables are decided and there should be SOPs set up. Once that is done, then we could have, say, multi-speciality team in place to develop the various aspects of that particular facility. So I think these are the 3 essentials and then with the standardized SOPs and the expected delivery set and a hierarchical model which will govern or oversee that these are being, it is outcome based and these are being pursued and the expected delivery is there. So that's how the model can sustain. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that stress on the governance model and the defined deliverables. So, with that, I would now request Professor Norcini for his thoughts. Like globally, if we see, and many centers would claim themselves as the center of excellence. So, what is it that truly differentiates between the so-called named centers of excellence from the actual centers of excellence in its true spirit?
So what I'd like to do are talk about two separate centers that are very good, very different, and then draw one sort of commonality from them. So if you look around the world, the folks at the Wilson Center, University of Toronto, an absolutely superb center of excellence. Their research productivity is absolutely fabulous. They do absolutely excellent work. And were I going out tomorrow to start a center of excellence, I would look at what some of the things they've done. The other alternative is NUS in Singapore. They're a little different. They are a little less focused on scholarship and research, although it's certainly a part of what they do. But they are much more focused on a sort of supportive and outreach kind of approach, an approach that enables medical education or health professions education very broadly. The thing that the two of them have in common is collaboration. If you look at the center in Toronto, they have collaborations with a number of other centers in Canada. They draw faculty, they draw trainees from the Health Services Institute. So they have a very broad outreach. Singapore is second to none. I mean, they have created the Asia Pacific Medical Education Conference, which draws folks from the region. They've created a journal that hopefully will be recognized in Scopus soon. So they have created the tools to do this, and they've done that through collaboration. It's not just Singapore. They've reached out to Sri Lanka, to Japan. The conference was in China last year. It'll be in Japan this year. So I think that as you think about where you want to be someday and what you want to be and what the purpose is, it's also good at some point to think about who are the right collaborators, because those collaborators are going to make a big difference in terms of what you're able to achieve.
Right. Thank you so much for that important point, because that actually decides on the reach, whether you actually remain symbolic and whether you're actually making a meaningful difference to impact the learning outcomes. Thank you for that, sir. And with this, continuing in the same lead, I would request now Professor Ambuj, sir. So now the said facility has received a grant, and this grant is for creating a center of excellence for in health profession education. So how is the team at SET leveraging and to promote the health professions education and educational research, both these things?
Thanks, Anu, for the question. I would say this is a grant for creating a center of excellence for health professional education, and the two important pillars of it is experimenting with health professional education itself and health professional education research. So the first is trying, how fun new it is, but for many of us it's new, trying newer ways of teaching, like online blended learning courses, using e-learning as a tool for students, because increasingly from our short study that was done here showed that many of the students are now engaged in e-learning and find it very engaging as compared to conventional classroom teaching. So we're trying these tools, trying newer tools like Padlet, which is useful, which has quizzes on it, and it's again found to be engaging in day-to-day classroom teaching. So we've tried to have multiple workshops, both for faculty development programs within AIIMS. We've also held it for some of the invited other AIIMS, and we, as we go forward in the next 3-4 years, we I mean, not in a very formal way, but informally, we want to engage other institutions of national importance, other AIIMS, and have a collaboration, as you were speaking to, kind of have a domino effect, so that to make this scalable and experiment this with this kind of medical education with other institutions also, who could then serve as it could be a TOT, and they could serve as the trainers for their regional medical institutions, because there are several now. Then the other is the medical education research, and we are inviting for grants. We're giving out grants for people to do medical education research, and that will be inviting certain number of grants every year, so that students, teachers are encouraged to get into medical education research. We've also worked at the national level with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Health, and we have their e-learning portal called the Saksham, and we're the nodal center to develop e-learning material. Again, it's an ongoing process, and we're learning as we populate that with the various e-learning materials that have been developed, again, by a wide network of medical colleges. Almost 150 medical colleges are part of the National Medical College Network. And this is not to kind of supplant classroom teaching, but to supplement classroom teaching. Because as Dr. Norcini was saying, I mean, we've really expanded rapidly in the last 10 odd years, in number of medical colleges, and number of intake of medical students. It's always difficult to keep up with quality of faculty for all these newer medical colleges that are to come up. So that's again a form of an experiment, how that works, to get the best teachers on the platform, so that the students, the remotest parts of the country, could benefit from the psychology teaching. So these are some of the things that we've done at the said facility and at AIIMS to bring about changes or innovations in medical education.
Right. So thank you so much for that, sir. So I hear two keywords. One is faculty development program and facilitating the faculty for pursuing subsequent medical education research. So going from this faculty development program and taking the thread further, Professor Rashmi, I would like to ask you that now we are establishing this center of excellence. So what is a better option? We train few faculty, handful of faculty deeply, or maybe we get maybe 50 to 60 members together and train them in important things. So what is a better option? So few faculty, deep training, intensive training, training of trainers, or maybe getting a handful of maybe more than a handful, and then training them superficially on the important domains.
Thank you, Anu. And I would, I would say that I want the whole platter. So I do want certain faculty members to take these newer modalities of teaching and training and be so much trained in them that we can send them as messengers from AIIMS Delhi to other institutes and disseminate whatever we are learning. I don't want to keep the learning within this institute itself, but of course this institute has to have certain faculty members, and in fact many faculty members who would know how to use these techniques in a good way, in a way which is not just useful for the students but useful for the teachers also. There has to be advantage on both ends of the users. So while the I mean, in my mind, I feel that all the faculty should be using digital learning, should be using the LMS, should be using simulation, but there should be one team that is so trained and that has so much potential that they can be sent to other places as trainers themselves.
Right. So thank you so much, ma'am. So we got a clear-cut idea that, yes, this could be the subsequent step forward while we are building the Center of Excellence. So having talked about faculty, their training, and sir, the question to you being in the position of Dean Academic, so we may not have, I'm not talking in terms of AIIMS New Delhi per se, but overall the medical education infrastructure and the other medical colleges. So if given a choice between, say, planning and assessment reform, vis-a-vis faculty development, vis-a-vis talking about infrastructure, so being in your position, which one should be the funding priority and why?
So I don't think it's an A versus B versus C situation, very honestly. I think they're all very, very closely interlinked. You can't sort of invest in an assessment strategy without having, at least a component of your faculty which is willing to take ownership and be champions of that revised or modified process. And then, as we've just heard, that there is an increase, when there is a far more requirement of technology and both information technology and otherwise. So without that investment, neither will your faculty development program be appropriately possible, nor will the assessment strategies meet the requirements. So I think you've got to clearly invest in a sort of maybe in a stepwise modular fashion, but do it concurrently and not say first we'll do this, then we'll do that, and then we'll do something else. In terms of, we also have to recognize that the level of preparedness and acceptance for this is going to be very heterogeneous across the medical colleges of India. So you must be very, very clear. I mean, things which certain medical colleges or schools will take for granted will be, an aspirational target for some others. So again, trying to sort of do a top down and thrust something which is perhaps easily workable in a subpopulation of medical schools into ones which are not yet ready for that transition, well, it'll be basically the death knell for that in times to come also, because everybody will then say, oh, we already tried it, it didn't work. So I think you need to be a bit more strategic and sensible as to what you do. There has to be a palette of the interventions. And now within that, you will have you'll have to prioritize across all three verticals which you referred to. And that has to be done by an internal consultation, including the recipients of that education, which is very, very critical. Because, if the students and the trainees have an inherent problem with what you're proposing, there will be a pushback which will end up. And the same thing will happen to the faculty. That, we've got enough on our plate, now you're adding so much more work for us. It's what's in it for us as a question which will require answering, and you've got to be able to sell what you want to do very, very clearly. Otherwise,
So thank you so much, sir, for that answer. And we really cannot prioritize, but then the approach has to be holistic. So taking from there, ma'am, we have been talking about faculty development programs, and actually faculty resistance is a big bottleneck when we talk about assessment, when we talk about framing a new competency based curriculum. So when we see this word faculty resistance in double quotes, and we really want to shift from compliance of the faculty, okay, the assessment would be done, and Professor Norcini rightly remarked that when assessment becomes everybody's work, it actually is nobody's responsibility. So taken from there, so how do you actually convert the so-called faculty compliance to faculty commitment?
So, when we talk about faculty compliance, I think first and foremost, the faculty have to be continuously, undergoing development programs, to be participating in these workshops, and then they need to be convinced. It cannot be thrust upon them that you need to have a particular change in, one form of assessment. Rather, they have to be convinced. So it is better to support up, your requirement with the data. So it should be data driven. Like say, for example, during the recent SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, like we all realized that it is not possible to go ahead with, hours of classroom teaching. And that's when we started on with online teaching. And now there is, for, achieving the CBME, we also have blended learning. There are some slow learners, there are fast learners. So the faculty have to be convinced by first of all, by, going through the data of the performance of the students, and see that if the poor learners are supplemented with these kind of online materials, or say some information by blended learning, and their performance improves. So this is the way to convince them and bring them on board. Once we bring them on board, then of course we have to have the expected deliverables formulated. And then this is not a one time orientation. So, and as Professor Tandon said, that faculty cannot be enforced on it, and unless they are convinced, how are we going to be benefited? So if they are convinced that yes, once we initiate this, like initially there's an inertia, but once it sets the ball rolling, like you have all this content, e-resources available, and the opportunity to give the blended learning materials. So then if you see an improvement in performance, then you have all the faculty in line. And then it sort of forms a chain reaction, and it will be more sustainable. So that is a key word. To take them ahead and to involve them in this whole process, rather than thrusting it upon them that, okay, this is what is the decision of the regulatory body. Rather, also involve them, take their suggestions as you go ahead and make a plan. I think that would work better, and it will be sustainable.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. So ownership is what will make a difference, and this cycle has to be continuous. Thank you so much for that, ma'am. So moving forward from this compliance to commitment, Professor Norcini, I have an important question for you. So we talked about educational research. So a set facility has been pushing this medical education research. So how far is medical education research, educational research in legitimizing the center of excellence? So how far does it go? And given the fact that all of us might be busy in our own clinical work, I mean, taking time out and pursuing this medical education research, I would like to have your comments on that.
So, first, in terms of research, I think it is absolutely essential that the group does research. Historically, educational research has not, certainly when I began, educational research was not widely respected. And as a consequence of that, when you would go to talk to people about research, they would say, well, that's just your opinion, go away. So I think it is absolutely critical, especially with health professionals who spend their lives immersed in research and it's using it in their day-to-day practice. I think it's a real problem to go to them and give them advice without having research that backs it up. And being engaged in research is absolutely essential from that perspective. It also gives you national and international recognition, which is absolutely critical. In terms of busy clinicians, which I think is a really crucial point, one of the things that I think is important is to develop a cadre in the center or with the center, a cadre of very interested clinical faculty. Does not need to be everybody in a department. Most people are not interested in doing this. And I don't think there's any way, as you said, that you're going to be able to drag them in and then they'll resent you for doing that. So identifying a group, a core group, and making sure that they get the sort of training and background that they need, I think is absolutely essential. The University of Toronto center I mentioned has that. They have a fellowship within the center, and they have a core group of faculty, and the core group of faculty have a diverse set of backgrounds. So there might be sociologists, psychologists, diverse group. And they serve as a core to help the clinical faculty who occupy most of the fellowship training positions. So what they get is they get support for their research from the center, and the research they do advances the field and increases the visibility and quality of the work being done.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And now Rashmi ma'am, the question for you, taking forward from there, is because your team does a lot of simulation. So, how do we ensure that simulation, though this is little delinked from the topic that we were discussing, but then it comes under the umbrella of training faculty development programs. So when we talk about simulation, so we do a lot of simulation in the laboratories, in the in the closed rooms. So it takes a huge Herculean effort to translate this bedside behavior, or sorry, the simulation lab behavior under test conditions to actually translating it to bedside. So what are your views on that? And how do we actually ensure that this actually translates into a good clinical practice?
Yeah, I think teachers who are doing simulation are also there on the bedside. So I think whatever they teach in that simulation lab, if they're practicing the same thing in the clinical areas also, that pushes a lot for simulating that behavior with the patients also. Whatever you're telling in the debriefing, if you yourself are not following it at the clinical areas, in your operation theaters, in your OPDs, or in the wards, then it gives a big dent to what you're trying to teach the students in your debriefing room. So the teachers are not just debriefers there with the especially people who practice simulation. They are also kind of role models when they are in their clinical areas. So I think that is one thing that really pushes what we teach is how we are practicing.
Right. So whatever we do in the lab, the same thing has to be replicated bedside and facilitated and mentored so that the practices are deep ingrained. Thank you for that, ma'am. So one question to everyone, and I would request none of you repeats the answer. So the question is that one currently accepted practice in medical education which you would believe needs to be challenged. So Professor Tandon, we can start from you. One practice.
We should do something because we've always done it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So we should not keep on doing something because we've already done that before. Sir.
Whatever your age, you should learn to adopt new technologies. And never more than the current times, we're seeing all kinds of technology. We're seeing AI coming. So you never stop learning.
So we need to be a lifelong learner on the other hand, right? Thank you so much for that. Rashmi ma'am?
I think all the assessments should be changed to formative assessment.
There should be no summative assessment. We will come back to that in a while. Professor Kalpana ma'am?
Yes. So assessment should be holistic, and whatever in the formative assessments, we in our institution we do have some percentage of it added on to the final summative, and we ultimately.
So you possibly want to propose that the current assessment is not holistic. So that is something which you would like to challenge. The point well taken. Final word from Professor Norcini.
That's unfortunate for you. So I'm going to be just say what I just said. I think it's really critical to stop thinking about assessment from the perspective of individual devices and thinking about it as a system that is shared and owned by the entire institution.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you everyone. And I think with their collective wisdom, there are a few things which are crystal clear for us. And being a lifelong learner and working to pursue innovation, talking about faculty development program and approach, having that holistic approach for developing the Center of Excellence. Thank you so much, everyone. And I would close the panel here, and we can have questions from the audience. Yes, Dr. Tony.
Question is for both Dr. Kalpana and Dr. Nikhil. The last major overhaul in the curriculum happened in 1977 at this institution, and probably the batch that had that intervention has also retired. It was 49 years ago.
There. The history of that.
Hence, the problem is, to quote Dr. Nikhil Tandon, is that a lot of this system has actually become part of the DNA of this institute as well. And so, when we are at the cusp of a curricular reform, how do you envisage dealing with the inertia, particularly from the majority of the faculty, that we are so used to this, why do we need to change it? Why do we need to tinker with something that is working so well?
So let me start with the last statement that you made. With what degree of certainty can we say it's working so well, right? So that's the no. It's an important question, right? And what have we done as a part of the process to actually check whether it's working so well or not? So that's important. So then I'm going to jump to a slightly sort of administrative statement, and that there is a process which is currently ongoing, and that is hopefully in the next couple of months we should have an effort to consolidate that, because that's the important thing for me. There's two parts. I think till now the curriculum review was more about course content and much less about course delivery. Right? So at the moment, what is being consolidated definitely is course content, and therefore departments have, I think, virtually everybody has sent in, maybe one or two haven't, but by and large everybody has sent in their recommendations for content. The next part is that with all these activities happening in a slightly fragmented way in terms of course delivery, that will be the next component, but I don't think we should release the first, i.e. the change content, without a recommendation in course delivery. That's my personal view. For the reason then that the delivery component will get again, will lag behind significantly. So what you said is absolutely correct. There have been so in the interregnum, what's been happening is less about substantive course content review, and rather than what's been happening is more is redefining lectures. Right? So this has been really the biggest effort in the recent past, and we hope that it will bear fruit in the way you would like it to bear fruit. In terms of inertia, I think that again, what you're saying is right. If you're so set in your ways, that's much more difficult to change. So the target audience has to be younger faculty who haven't actually sort of been totally become mummified into the way of teachings. One, and they're more acceptable to technological interfaces in the course. So I'm that's my anticipation. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know, but I think I would definitely.
All the shots are already fossilized.
So I think that so no, that's a fair question. The issue is what can the corridor of the dean's office do to ensure that there is an active participation of the younger learner. And that has to be a part of the effort. Leaving it only to the extreme right of the chronological distribution curve is perhaps not the only way of doing this discussion. And I sort of hope that once again we'll be able to. Listen, we've done it. So the only time we've done it before, that means we would have done something right at some point in time. So there is a legacy of having taken steps which were at total variance to what was prevailing in the ecosystem outside. So I think that's enough of a stimulant to do it again.
So taking forward from what Rajan sir said, that we already have given a lot of content suggestions to be changed.
Going forward from that, already the preclinical departments, as Tony, you would be aware, coming from anatomy and biochemistry, physiology, we have already initiated a number of integration courses conducting for the preclinical sessions. And soon this is going to be, we are going to make an attempt into vertical integration. And also saying that, yes, younger faculty are the ones who can be motivated, but for that, I should definitely say this, coming from a CMED workshop, which is ongoing today, we have middle level faculty like Dr. Anu, Dr. Mohit Joshi, Dr. Rakesh Gar actively involved, coming out of their busy clinical schedules and conducting dedicated courses. So we do have highly motivated people, and as Professor Norcini mentioned, it need not be that the entire 1,000 faculty of the institute should be motivated. Even if there are a handful, I'm sure they would further motivate the younger faculty, and we will make it a success. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Mohit.
My question is Dr. Nikhil Tender again. Sorry, sir. Right. So we're in the process of transitioning from the existing traditional curriculum to a competency-based one. We're working towards it. Now, my apprehension is when we're talking about competency, we're talking about a construct, which includes everything like knowledge, skill, attitude on a particular thing. But when we come actually to the assessment or delivery part of it, we are primarily addressing the sub-competencies or maybe specific learning objectives from different domains or maybe across the topics. So how we are looking forward to assess and train a person in competency rather than in these sub-competencies.
So, I think the first step in doing anything is first to identify that it needs to be done, right? And the fact that you're raising those questions means you will have a conversation about that. From a personal perspective, the only thing I can say on this is on a slightly humorous aside that the skill-based or the competency-based curriculum for the erstwhile Medical Council of India versus the National Medical Council started about 10 years or even longer ago was when the document workup was being done and all of that was being done. It lay in stagnation in somebody's office or somewhere in the Ministry of Health for a long time. When we took over as a board of governors, our primary contribution was to find where it was stuck, remove it from that office, and actually get it operational. So I'm got reasonable competencies in handling that end, as long as the upstream components are taken care by the content experts. You get it to a state where when it should be rolled out, I will get it rolled out. But I'm not competent to do all the rest of the work which you guys are going to have to do. So very different roles out here.
Thank you, sir. That's to our advantage.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you know why you made sure you were there?
But you have to do the work first.
Yes, please.
Bringing systems thinking into the COE as we discussed on the assessment. What is the role of students in that? Not just as test subjects. Like how can they actually contribute to COE? Like what are we actually doing in the current COE that we have at AIIMS?
Students' contribution to the Center of Excellence, not only as test subjects, but beyond that.
Yeah, thank you, Amal. I think it's something that we discussed when we were discussing assessment also. Students are also stakeholders, and I think in one of the slides, Dr. Norcini said students are also stakeholders. Here also students are stakeholders for us, and whatever we roll out for us, if it is a faculty development program, faculty are the students for us. We take good feedback from them. Sometimes, yes, we don't do it as frequently as we would want to. That during the inception itself, during the creation of the program itself, we take their inputs. It's not possible always to get students at that level. But for the time being, what in our COE we are doing is trying to incorporate, trying to be iterative about the feedbacks that we are receiving for all the programs we are running or all the workshops we are conducting.
So, coming from CMET, I would have to add that we are already conducting a series of workshops for senior residents, maybe on Saturday afternoons, because it's very difficult to pull out senior residents from their duties from the wards. So this has been going on for the past couple of years post-COVID, and now we are trying to stitch up, major topics, covering for 5 to 6 workshops or so, and formalize it with the academic section so that you get a certification formal certification saying that you've completed all these topics, and that would immensely benefit you because it is the students or the residents who are going to be the future faculty in this institute and also in the other institutes of India.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, Dr. Simran.
So I have a question with Dr. Norcini. So you mentioned about the challenges in medical education research. So how do you think this administrative inertia of conducting or of accepting medical education research be effectively addressed?
So push that a little further for me. Tell me a little more about what you're thinking.
So, like, let us suppose I'm a cognitive neuroscientist.
Right.
So, while working with my area, the research, it is very easy to do. I mean, there is no there is no hindrance to it, per
Mhm.
se. But while I'm planning medical education research, so either to adopt, like you mentioned, to adopt any new strategy, it should be data driven. And to drive the data, we must do the research. So at times it has been taken like because we want to publish more papers, we want to do research. That is why we are implementing newer strategy. So this kind of challenge, it does crop up at times. So how do we address to that?
So I think there are a couple ways to focus on that. One is to, if you want to make a change like that, to review what's already been done in other places. I think that's sort of the first step in that process. Second step is to identify how you're different than what you saw the research be, so that you have you're creating something that's unique to here and that addresses your particular set of needs. So, and third, I think at the same time, if you can find a gap in the other work that's been done where you can make a unique contribution, I think it kind of satisfies all three. So you're starting from a place where there's some evidence, and that's good. You're tailoring the work to what's happening here, and at the same time, you've identified a gap in the literature that you're going to address. So when you collect your data, you're going to be able to hopefully be able to publish that, but you'll also be able to fulfill the needs of the local organization. So the idea is to kind of find the sweet spot, so to speak, in that process.
Thank you so much. And final few keywords which I think take home for every one of us. So having a dedicated unit with a defined reach, a defined governance, defined deliverables, inter-institution collaboration, faculty development programs, facilitating the faculty for medical education research, defined ownership, and have a defined cadre for the clinical faculty. So good take home for all of us. And thank you again, esteemed panelists, for your collective wisdom. I think some parts the dust is getting away and we have hand-holding and guidance clearly coming up to us of the next steps forward. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Anu and esteemed faculty members for this insightful discussion. I invite Professor Rashmi to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. We've already thanked you enough, I guess, Dr. Norcini. So
Yeah,
I'll just
more than
thank-
enough.
I'll just thank the audience, and it's been a pleasure hosting you all. And I really appreciate the discussions that we've generated today. So I invite Dr. Tandon now to present a plaque to Professor Norcini. You'll have to come from here. Better picture.
Better picture. With his face, I don't know.
I'm trying to master the art of doing this. There you are.
Kalpana.
This is better. It's visible, hopefully. Yeah. Oopsie.
Anu.
Not successful. Stand it up.
Dr. Mohan.
We'll get maybe close this to you. Easy for you.
Can I now request you, Professor Norcini, to present a show the painting?
You want to show the painting? You can give any orders. You're in charge. Yeah, we can charge you.
Now, you and customs, you know what you pack.
I know.
To a local painter which has paintings from the region.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Once you take the picture,
But I'll keep this for you. Don't worry, I'll give it back to you. चलो नहीं अभी चलो नहीं. Yeah, may I request you to please present just a small token to the panelists?
Yes, oh, that'd be wonderful.
Dr. Tandon.
Good to be on this side.
We can't give you this, unfortunately.
No,
You have to
yeah.
carry.
This for you. So I'll request you to present one to Dr. Kalpana. Can I request Simran to please accept a nice bonsai? Ravi, please accept. Anu? And one for you, Dr. Ambudh. Is there anything left for me? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So please join us for a cup of tea.